All right, it's time once again to talk Cleveland Browns football on the Our Lads Football Network, the OFN today. And anytime we talk Cleveland Browns football, we turn over to the man you can find over at theobr.com, the Orange and Brown Report, Fred Greetham. Fred, good to talk to you again.
Always talk. Always good to talk to you too, Greg.
How you doing? How's everything going? The draft is over. That was a pretty busy time in the offseason, and now it's on to the waiting game for training camp.
Yeah, absolutely. We did a live stream Thursday, Friday, and Saturday, so it was quite extensive, especially when the Browns didn't have a first or second round pick. So
Yeah.
you had a lot of people though that we had like 500 people hung out with us live. It's unbelievable the Browns fan base, even with a not having a pick till the third round. So yeah, I think now that's behind us. I said all along the Browns, they really had a great offseason. The draft wasn't really expecting somebody in the third or fourth round to make an impact on this year's team, but they could. I mean, they got a couple guys, but they really upgraded their team. I think they're really flying under the radar,
Yep.
at least on paper. Probably the best team I've covered in 30 some years doing this. You have to do it on the field, but they sure really made some headway. Some of the things I wrote about and suggested, it seemed like they carried that out. So I can't disagree or criticize anything they've done just because um, I kind of agreed with everything and asked them if they wanted to get back to the playoffs. These are some of the things I think they need to do. And Andrew Berry, almost hit it to a T, across
Yes.
the board.
Yeah. It really, if you look at it, based on the grades that our lads was giving out, well, I shouldn't say grades, but really where they were projecting some of these players to go, there were four of them that really stuck out of the seven picks. So you had Tillman, who was taken in the third round, and even Ika, who was taken in the third round. Our lads both projected as potential first round players. Same thing with round four tackle DeJuan Jones. He was projected as a possible first round player. And Weipler, the center, was projected as a second round, and the Browns got him in the sixth. So that's how you do it when you don't have a draft pick in the first two rounds.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this really, all the years I've covered drafts, the GMs, whoever it is, always said we're going to take the best player available on our board, and I know they don't do that.
Yeah.
I really feel Andrew Berry did that this year because he's drafted 3 years now, and he's taken a center 3 years in a row. And I think the Whippler, however you pronounce it, was just that. He was graded so high that they just said, how can we pass a guy like that up
Yeah.
in the sixth round? And I think that was the same thing with DeJuan Jones. I mean, not too many times the 6'8", 370-pound young man is available in the fourth round. And across the board. And I think Tillman, they had a need for a big wide receiver, 6'3", and they were able to get him. And I think a lot of that, the reason he's in the third round was because he missed almost half or more of the season after ankle surgery and still was productive. So there's a reason, but they really got a lot of value. The only one that I really think, the two third round picks, you could say they had a need for wide receiver, a big one, and they also had a need for a run stopper, and that's what they think they got in Ika.
Yeah, but even so with Tillman, it wasn't like the receiving room was bereft of talent. Like if he wasn't there and they went into the season with Cooper, Peoples Jones, and Elijah Moore and David Bell and Goodwin with the 4 and 5, I think they'd be all right. We'll go with that for another year. But because I can't imagine that they were real. I don't think that they looked at it and said, "Yeah, I think Cedric Tillman will be here." I think that they were pretty fortunate and probably just loved the fact that the kid was still there and said, "Hey, we got to take this kid because, like you said, we need a big guy in that room anyway." And I really like Tillman, and I think Tillman has the opportunity to be one of the better wide receivers in this class.
Yeah, it was interesting because they had their first pick was at 74, and if you remember, the Giants traded up to 73 and took Jalen Hyatt, and also from front
Yeah,
wide receiver from Tennessee, and so immediately the Browns took Tillman, and it was interesting because was did the Giants make that trade because they thought the Browns were taking Hyatt? But it's strange then to take Tillman immediately following. So you have to think maybe the word was out that the Browns were high on a wide receiver from Tennessee.
yeah,
And that's why the Giants traded up
yeah,
because it's hard to believe that they had them ranked exactly, that close or that the same.
sure.
They obviously haven't explained or said anything there. So I don't know if we'll ever know, but yeah, I mean, Tillman, a lot of people, and you said our lads, were talking about Tillman as a first round pick the year before when he had like 1,200 yards. But then he had that surgery to start the 2022 season on his ankle. But instead of shutting it down, he came back and played like the last 6 games and still had 37 catches for over 400 yards. That to me is pretty productive.
Yep.
That's close to 7 catches a game. So, yeah, I think they're very pleased with him, and I think he has a chance to immediately help them. As you said, they added Elijah Moore and Marquise Goodwin, and those are speed receivers, but they still didn't really have the tall
Yeah,
one.
yeah.
And Tillman really could be a guy that could be a replacement for Peoples-Jones as he is in the final year of his contract. And if he has a big year, I think the Browns would extend him. But if he doesn't take the next step this year, they might just say, well, we'll go with Tillman and let Peoples-Jones move on. So they already have, if you count Tillman, Andrew Berry's really never cut anybody he drafted. He's
Okay.
going to have to this year. But you have to say Tillman's a lock, and that would put 6 locks on the roster at wide receiver. And that's not counting, Anthony Schwartz, who was a 3rd-round pick a couple years ago. And so I think the wide receiver position's almost set. Obviously, you have injuries and different things. They already had Michael Woods go down, probably out for the season. He was injured in the offseason. But yeah, they have 13 wide receiver, 14 under contract right now. So there's not much room for wide receivers. And I think Tillman, they really are happy with able to get him in the 3rd round.
By the way, if everybody stays healthy, do they go with 7, knowing that Jakeem Grant kind of fits that? That's the position he is, even though they're not going to use him a lot as a receiver, but he would be the primary return man.
Yeah, he had that unfortunate ruptured Achilles last year in training camp, and they were really counting on him. He was a Pro Bowler, kick and punt returner. The biggest thing, obviously, is his speed and quickness, and it's hard to project coming off of that injury.
Yeah.
If he's going to have exactly the same speed that he did before. And like you said, the roster is pretty much set. They really still could use a return man, but he's going to have to really show that he is up to speed from day one. We haven't seen him. Andrew Berry said he's coming along good. He praised him for his return, but you don't know what that means. They also re-signed him or renegotiated his contract. He did have like a $3 million contract for this year, and that would make it even tougher to make the team, I would think. But I think renegotiate. They're going to give him every opportunity, but yeah, if they keep 7 wide receivers counting Grant, they're going to have to cut somewhere else. And I don't. This roster is really shaping up to be very strong. So
Yep.
it's going to be a tough. What always happens, you hate to say it, but somebody always gets hurt, and that opens up an opportunity. But there's some guys that have been, you know, pretty high picks that are probably not going to make the team this year just because of the numbers. And you look by the contract, that kind of tells, you know, if they're going to be on the team or not. And when you look at Goodwin, you look at Moore and the guys beside Cooper and like you said, Peoples-Jones, David Bell, just a third round pick a year ago. There's not much room for anybody else.
No. And that's a really nice looking future three if it all works out. Tillman, Bell, and Moore. But it all has to work out, of course. But you know, the setup is excellent, and that's what we talked about before the draft. And I even reiterated that going over the draft preview and the draft recaps of specifically Cleveland, that Cleveland was one of those rare teams that, yeah, they didn't have a first round pick. Yeah, they didn't have a second. But if you look at the roster, that was one team that actually could afford it because the roster is better than you think. And sure enough, that's exactly what we're talking about here today. And then throw in the fact we haven't even talked since the Zadarius Smith move, which was an awesome move because that was another key issue. They needed to find that second edge rusher. They did draft McGuire in the 4th round, so we could talk about that as well. But yeah, Zadarius Smith, adding him to that edge rush department, finally giving Myles Garrett another really dominant guy. Not to say he hasn't had some guys, but usually they're around for a year. Hopefully Zadarius Smith will be here for more than a year.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that I just wrote a story this week that after the draft, Andrew Berry traded for Zadarius Smith and signed Rodney McLeod, a safety, who Pro Football Focus had him as the 7th best safety last year. And I just feel that those were exclamation points on the offseason moves. I wrote a 5-step series on how the Browns could get back to the playoffs. Not that I know all, but my opinion was that there was 5 things that Andrew Berry needed to do in the offseason. And before free agency, I wrote the number 1 need was interior defensive line. And he got Dalvin Tomlinson from the Vikings as a free agent,
Yep.
and then drafted Ika from Baylor. And he also added Maurice Hurst and Tristan Hill, some guys that had some upside in the past, but had some injuries. Second move was edge rusher. And I thought, and at the OBR, our film guys and our cap guy really zeroed in on Obo Okoronkwo as one of the 3 best matches for the Browns, an ascending edge rusher, and he signed him in free agency. And so he is opposite Garrett, but then I felt they needed really to get another edge rusher in the rotation. So if Garrett or Okoronkwo were injured or missed some time or even needed a rest in the game, they had somebody else in the rotation, and they weren't counting on, you know, a rookie or a second-year guy like McGuire or Alex Wright or Isaiah Thomas to have to play immediately. And so they went out and traded for Zadarius Smith, which I think was a home run. I mean, I think he's really going to wreak havoc, you know, with Myles Garrett and Jim Schwartz's defense. So I can't say enough about what they've done in the offseason. Now you have to do it.
Yeah, and this kid McGuire, apparently, I mean, from what we've heard, you know, high motor kid, should work really well as far as a developmental edge rusher, especially by signing Smith. Don't have to worry about putting too much pressure on him. How do you think, and I know it's early, but is there any specific role do you think he's going to have early on? Or is he basically, do you think it's going to be one of those, or like I just said, is going to take him along slowly and hopefully develop him into a long-term edge rusher?
Yeah, I mean, I think he's got great upside. He's only 21 and played in the SEC. So as he even said when we talked to him over the weekend at rookie minicamp, that he's going against the best. A lot of guys that were drafted every week, you know, especially at Missouri, you know, you're playing Alabama and Auburn and,
Yep.
you know, and all the schools, Georgia every week. And those are a lot of NFL players. And the beauty of having Okoronkwo, Miles Garrett, and Smith at the top of the rotation is you don't have to have McGuire be ready, right away. You hope he can win, a position and join the rotation, but you don't have to count on him. So many times in the past, the Browns were drafting guys in the third, fourth, fifth rounds, and they had to come in and start. This guy doesn't even have to get on the field because of those top three.
Yep.
But you got Alex Wright. He was a third-round pick last year. He's returning. And Isaiah Thomas, a seventh-round pick last year. So between those three guys, I think they'll battle for the fourth and fifth positions in the rotation. And then you can bring them along, and maybe the second half of this year or the future, they'll be ready to go, ready to play. So I like the upside of Alex Wright, Isaiah McGuire, and I think that this is a good way to do it. The good teams develop through the draft guys to replace guys that become free agents, and so you're not always relying on free agency.
Yeah, and as you said, bolstering the interior of the defensive line, especially with younger players. Hopefully, Winfrey develops this season. Didn't have the rookie year that they were looking for, but it happens. So that's a big that's a big need going forward. And then to draft Ika to go along with Winfrey as a pair of young interior linemen is something that they have to be pretty happy about, because this kid, I mean, he's a big dude, but he's mobile. This is not just your standard, I'm going to, be a space eater and let the linebackers get all the glory. This is a kid that could actually move with that body of his.
Yeah, Jim Schwartz, the defensive coordinator, talked about him, calling him a Ferrari, that he's not going to be used like he was maybe in college, where he was just, like you said, a space eater. They expect him to rush from the inside and provide some challenge up the middle. And when you have Garrett, Okoronkwo, and Zadarius Smith on the outside, and Dalvin Tomlinson, you really, they have to choose who they're going to block. And that should free up. You would think that Ika would be, a candidate to be able to take advantage of his matchup in the middle there. And so we'll see how quick he's able to be up to speed. But this is really the most Andrew Berry has addressed the interior defensive line. I mean, before, the highest he drafted Jordan Elliott in the third round. You mentioned Winfrey. That was a fourth-round pick. But this year he went out, and the biggest free agent, was Dalvin Tomlinson, and gave him like 4 years, $57 million. And they also, a former second-round pick, Tristan Hill of the Cowboys, and Maurice Hurst. So to a lesser degree, a couple free agents, and then drafted Siaki Ika in the third round. So they added 3-4 guys, in that particular, this off season, and I think it will do well going forward.
And then flipping over to the offensive side of the ball, that offensive line, which, again, I mean, if they wanted to add some insurance, a couple of, because the backups maybe not as strong, so maybe they can add some players to push some of the starters, especially like you said, even though they didn't need a center, wasn't a bad idea to bring in Weipler, considering he was available in the 6th round, but also to take that kid Jones, 6'8", 370. I mean, incredible size, and he also has the physical gifts to go along with it. And now he gets to be coached by maybe the best line coach in the game, in Bill Callahan. That's only going to make things even more promising for his future. So what you like about the Jones move is that now maybe this puts even more pressure on Jedrick Willis to finally live up to his stature as a first-round draft pick. And if something just doesn't click there for Willis in the next year or two, then maybe Jones is a nice fallback option.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, you can't coach 6'8", 370. I mean, you can work with it. And I mean, one of the biggest questions that he was asking around the draft was that he didn't really love football. He wanted to play basketball in the NBA, because came out of the combine that one of the teams asked him something about, what he'd really like to do. And he mentioned, because he was recruited to go to Kent State to play basketball, and at the last minute he changed his mind and decided to go to Ohio State to play football. And I think it was kind of a young man who wouldn't want to play in the NBA. You're 21, you get asked a question, you say something like that. Well, he said that isn't at all his motivation. And we'll see. Like you said, Bill Callahan, if he can't get anything out of him, then probably nobody can. But they drafted James Hudson a couple years ago, and you don't know really what they think of him now. He played a couple games for Jack Conklin last year, right tackle, and played pretty well. But you have him and now Jones. They picked up the fifth-year option on Jed Wills, but there's no question if he's going to get extended with a big contract, he's going to have to step up and play better than he did. And maybe, Jones working in the background could be the motivation to get him, playing better and more consistent, or it'll give the Browns an option. That's, again, what I said. The better teams in the NFL are developing guys behind them so they can move on if they're not up to speed and not have to pay a contract for a guy that isn't really living up to it. So I think it's a value pick again, DeJuan Jones. It could really be a home run. He played some left tackle, he said, at Ohio State when the kid that was playing there got drafted 6th overall, was injured, and so he slipped over to left. So, his future might be in right tackle, but it could also, it would be a nice find if he can end up being a left tackle.
Yeah, I mean, look, obviously they want Wills to develop into the man, and they'd be happy to give him a nice big contract if he can put it all together and have a great season in 2023. Because imagine having Wills on one side and DeJuan Jones maybe as your future right tackle. Now you start feeling real good about your future at two very important positions on the offensive line. But again, worst case scenario, maybe Jones, if he works out, is that insurance policy if Wills does not. Staying on offense, they did not add a running back. And this was something that, we talked about as a distinct possibility. And there was no Kareem Hunt. Jerome Ford has been now put into position as the number 2. That could, at this point, that could still be the case. And we just weren't sure how the Browns felt about that. We weren't really sure. Well, are we sure now that the Browns are confident that Jerome Ford is going to be able to take those number 2 snaps, or do you think that that the team is going to add a veteran?
Yeah, I think a little bit of both. Right now, they didn't draft a running back, and they signed one undrafted Hassan Hall, undersized, 5'10", 196, out of Georgia Tech. At the rookie minicamp, he was, I tweeted out a video because he was the only guy with Stump Mitchell, the running back coach, and it kind of looked weird to just see one guy there. But I think that right now the plan would be Nick Chubb and Jerome Ford, and then the third back, because they also lost Dearness Johnson in free agency. Kareem Hunt still has not signed. I cannot see a path for him coming back, but stranger things have happened. But right now, there's a guy, John Kelly, who they've kept on the practice squad the previous 2 years, and he's still under contract. So I would say right now he would probably be the third back.
Okay.
And I think they're really going to transition more to a passing offense. So I think it'll come down to Nick Chubb catching the ball out of the backfield as well as Jerome Ford. And if Ford can handle that, I think he would be the guy. There are some guys out there, free agents still available. A guy like Justin Jackson could be brought in. I think they have an emergency list of guys. There's been rumors about Zeke Elliott. I do not see, why he would be a guy they bring in. I think it would be more of a guy that can catch passes out of the backfield.
Okay.
Remember, they also have a guy on the roster they drafted as a running back, Demetric Felton. who really didn't get to play last year. They moved him to wide receiver, but I don't see a path, as I mentioned, with wide receivers, how he's even going to make the team as a wide receiver. They could even look to see maybe he could be the third down back if they don't like what Ford's doing or don't want to use Chubb, in that room. But right now, I don't see a panic button. I think that with Deshaun Watson, I think that you'll see a little more of a spread offense. And I think Chubb will still be used, but I don't know if he's going to get 20 carries a game like everybody was hoping he'd get last year. So I think they have some options, but if I was to say right now, it would be Chubb, Ford, and John Kelly.
Okay. Yeah, because when you spend all that money and all that capital to bring in Deshaun Watson, you're not going to remain a run-first offense. So the days of Nick Chubb getting the majority of not just snaps and carries, but the focal point of the offense is just over. That's just the way it is. But yeah, at this point in time, you would think that they probably add a veteran, but that's something that we could talk about. Or, of course, obviously, Browns fans can follow your work at theobr.com between now and training camp. A couple other picks. So speaking of the quarterback position, so they added Thompson Robinson from UCLA. And what you like about him is very experienced. And nowadays, that's just not the case. Nowadays, kids with 40 career starts, it just doesn't happen very often. I come into the NFL, but that's what he had, working with Chip Kelly. So he worked with a guy who knows football, especially for the offense and the quarterback position. Very competitive kid, tough kid. Has been in a lot of big games. There's some limitations, no question. Size is one of those, but that's why he was drafted in the 5th round. He's not drafted to be the quarterback, the number one guy. That's Deshaun Watson. What do you think about adding this kid, though, in the 5th round with the limited number of draft picks? To use it here, that means that they have a pretty good investment that this kid is going to hopefully be the long-term backup.
Yeah, I mean, that's going to be an interesting situation at training camp because they brought Josh Dobbs back. He was the backup to Jacoby Brissett the first 11 games, and then when Watson was brought off a suspension, they chose to release Dobbs because they didn't want to expose Kellen Mond to waivers because they liked his contract, even though he was inactive for every game last year. And so then you went out and got Dobbs as a free agent after he got some starts with the Titans. And I believe he was given a 1-year, $2 million guaranteed contract. So would they eat that contract in order to go with Thompson Robinson? Because since Andrew Berry's been here, they've only kept 2 quarterbacks on the active roster, okay. And they had one on the practice squad. But if you expose Thompson Robinson to the practice squad, somebody will probably claim him and you would lose him. So do you keep 3 quarterbacks? If I was to guess right now, that's what I think they would do. Yep. Is cut Kellen Mond, keep Dobbs as the backup, and Robinson as the third developmental. But then after this year, hopefully, in their opinion, Robinson will be ready to be Watson's backup and move on from Dobbs after this. So that's kind of what will happen, yep. I think. But it is interesting because that would be going away a little bit from the way Andrew Berry's done the roster. Saves a roster spot by only having 2 quarterbacks. And as competitive as the roster's going to be, you're kind of using it on a 3rd quarterback just because I can't imagine they would let him go unless he just looks terrible.
Sure. Or the opposite. He looks so good that they feel a little bit more confident to, like you said, eat Dobbs' contract. And that could happen as well. So... And this is why you were saying trying to keep 7 wide receivers isn't going to be so easy. This is part of it. Because what happens all of a sudden if they do need to keep 3 quarterbacks? So Very interesting decisions they're going to have, but that just shows you that it's a very deep roster. It's a lot better than people think. And then finally, Cameron Mitchell, he was also taken in round 5. And the word on Mitchell is that he has he is an NFL caliber corner as far as his tools. It's just a matter of things like technique, discipline. These are the things that he has to work on. But to get a kid like this in the 5th round, they must have liked him, because it wasn't like the defensive backfield was an issue. That was definitely not one of the parts of the team, the positions that the Browns felt they had to add. So they must have liked them.
Yeah, the cornerback room probably is the strongest room on the defense going into the offseason. I mean, you had 2 first-rounders, Denzel Ward and Greg Newsome, and then Martin Emerson, who they drafted last year, really emerged as a rookie. So your top 3 corners are really strong. They let Greedy Williams, a former second-round pick, walk in free agency because of the emergence of Emerson, and they like A.J. Green, who they got as an undrafted free agent 3 years ago. So the top 4 are pretty set. And Mitchell, kid from Northwestern, obviously pretty smart, and coming in here with Newsome and another Northwestern guy, I think that they're just, again, going for depth and going to develop guys for the future, and picking the best available at that position. So I think that's why you saw him in the 5th round take a quarterback and a cornerback, because in their opinion, that was better, even though they had a need for safety, because they hadn't signed McLeod at that point, and they didn't draft a safety, and they really only had 3 safeties under contract. And that was counting Thornhill, the free agent, Grant Delpit, and D'Anthony Bell, who didn't even play on defense last year. So they've since added McLeod, and then they signed 2 undrafted safeties from Ohio State. But they obviously felt Mitchell was better than those safeties that were available, when they drafted at that time.
Yeah, the kid you just mentioned, one of them, the kid that fans should keep an eye on, is Ronnie Hickman. And it's another Ohio State kid, as you said. I'm sure Buckeye/Browns fans know a lot about Hickman, because our lads, they had him as a potential 3rd round draft pick. So we just talked about all the value from the draft picks. Well, here's another value. You're able to sign a kid after the draft that could have gone in the 3rd round.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I was saying, as far as a lot of us thought they might draft him, in the 5th, 6th, 7th round, or could even have been higher, because they needed a safety. They needed more depth. But yet they felt like, okay, getting another cornerback was worth it. And, they did that. Linebacker was another area of need, and they didn't draft any linebackers, and they signed Mohamed Diabate from Utah and gave him like $200,000 guaranteed or something like that. And, here's a guy that might make the team. And you would think, okay, they traded away their 7th round pick just to get rid of it. Why wouldn't you just draft the guy in the 7th round to make sure that he'd come to your team? So they must have already felt pretty good that he was coming. And, the way some of the things shake out, it's interesting. But as you said, Hickman, they gave some guaranteed money. I heard $200,000 as well.
Okay.
So they liked him. And I think those undrafted guys have a chance to make the team because of the position they play.
And what's also good about both Diabate and Hickman is they are very good on special teams. So that is going to be their calling card to making the roster, if they can, is perform on special teams first and foremost, and then we'll develop you at those positions moving forward. So I could definitely see that being the case. And also Dave Syverson mentioned from our lads, our lead scout, to keep an eye on Lonnie Phelps, another kid that they signed, the edge rusher. I believe he's from Kansas. So we'll have to keep an eye on him as well.
Yeah, I mean, they they did well for drafting until the third round as far as
Yeah.
value. Most of the sites, including our lads, all rated, that they got guys that were expected to go higher. And so you're really starting to see Andrew Berry, be able to fill the holes at positions that maybe you didn't necessarily need, but it allows you, as far as the Ohio State center, Whippler. To give you an example, they drafted Nick Harris his first year in the fifth round. He was set to take over for J.C. Treader when he retired last year, and that's what you wanted, was a fifth round pick to come in. He tore his ACL in the first play of the first preseason game, and so they had to turn it over to Ethan Posick, who really was just signed as insurance for Harris. And then Posick went on to have a tremendous year.
Yeah.
He was a free agent.
Yep.
And so instead of letting him walk, then they signed him to a 3-year, $18 million deal. So that makes him, by contract, pretty much the starting center.
Yep.
So Nick Harris now is pretty much going to be the backup. Well, then, because Whippler, however you pronounce it, is available, they draft him, and that gives you a tremendous need. With a sixth-round guy, you have to assume he could not do well in the preseason, but he wins the backup job to Posick, and Harris is kind of out of a position. And it's unfortunate the way the NFL works, but here was a guy who had everything being groomed, and now it's going to probably work against him that the sixth-round kid is going to make more sense to keep this year.
That's why we see it all. You've been around long enough. You don't get injured. When you're one of those fringe players and you get your chance, you can't get hurt. It's unfortunate. It's a tough business. That's what it is. It's a business to these kids as well as it should be. And unfortunately, Nick Harris, the way it looks, unless he's just not the guy, long term, Nick Harris might have to look elsewhere at some point if he's going to start in the NFL. So we'll see. But hey, if he's talented enough, he'll find a spot somewhere. By the way, can Nick Harris play multiple positions, or is he just a center? Because I know Whippler has only played center at Ohio State.
Well, Harris actually has 2 starts in the NFL with the Browns, and his first one was at guard. If you remember the playoff game against Pittsburgh, he started, I believe, that game because there was an injury. And then he got hurt, and Michael Dunn and Blake Hance and other guys took over for him. But his only start in the NFL with the Browns was on Christmas Day against Green Bay, not last year, but the year before, when Treader was sitting out because of COVID.
Okay.
And he actually graded out well, but that was his only start in an NFL game for the Browns at center.
Okay.
And so, they do have him at center and guard. In minicamp, Whippler said that he has actually been practicing more at guard than center. So that was a little interesting because maybe they would see him as a guard backup and Harris would still be the center. But Callahan kind of has the interior guys, center and guard, all play all those positions. So I don't know if they'll have too much duplication, but it was interesting that he said that he has been kind of penciled in as a guard.
Yeah, because they're not really – you talked about Hudson, and then they also have Haig, who we've seen around the league, and then they drafted Jones, but the interior backups, Gossett and Forbes – that's not as strong.
Well, they re-signed Michael Dunn too.
Oh, they did. Okay.
He was the backup last year at center and guard as well, and so it's going to be. I was a little surprised when they signed Gossett as a free agent, because, like you said, they've been keeping Dunn and Forbes and Harris, some of these guys around for those positions. So it's going to be quite competitive making the team in there.
Before I let you go, is there a spot still, like if the Browns brass came out of this offseason thinking well, we solved a lot of problems or several problems, but there's just one position, there's one issue that we're going to have this season, potentially during the season, or at the worst case, that we're going to have to try and fill next offseason? What would it be?
Well, I would say on defense, they've got like 5 linebackers returning that finished on injury reserve, and they didn't really add much. They added Michael Adams, I think, but he's mostly a special teams guy. They re-signed Anthony Walker. Most of these guys are kind of in the last year of their deal. Sione Taki's coming off an ACL, and Walker off a quad injury, and JOK. But interior defensive tackle, if Maurice Hurst or Tristan Hill emerge, then it wouldn't be so much of an issue, or even Ika for that matter. But as far as the depth issues, on the interior defense, and then you like running back, going to do with a backup to Chubb. Is Ford the long-term answer, or you got to get somebody else?
All right, sounds good. So, Fred, I appreciate it as always. I want to remind everybody to take a look at this. This is the Our Lads Draft Guide. Fred has one of these. This is still a perfect time to order it at ourlads.com, because maybe even better and more important than before the draft, because now you know where all the players are, including the Cleveland Brown players. And each and every draft pick has a write-up in this magazine for your Cleveland Browns. So check that out at ourlads.com. The draft review guide's coming out next month, so you want to order that as well. Link in the description area is going to be available from this video, where you can go directly to the page where you can order either or both of those draft guides. So, Fred, looking forward to it. Can't wait to talk to you again, because that means it'll be training camp and the preseason. And that's a part of the year that I just can't, I just want it to fly by, as though I know a lot of football fans feel the same way. Once the draft is over, you just want these next 2 or 3 months to fly by.
Well, I need a little break, but yeah, I get you.
Thanks a lot, Fred. Well, by the way, how many shows you doing now a week?
I do one on Wednesday every night or every week at 7, except we're going to take, I think we're going to do one after mini camp here in a couple weeks.
Okay.
But then we're going to take the month of June off and then pick up training camp in July.
Thanks, Fred. We'll talk to you in a few months.
Okay.